This is episode 30. We had concluded chapter 4 in episode 29, and with that we have covered chapters 1 to 4, that is Arjuna Vishad Yoga, Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. In my opinion, these 4 chapters are the most important in the Gita. And the next set of important chapters are 7 to 11, wherein God talks about himself. I think these 9 chapters are the most important. Chapters 1 to 4 are the crux of the Gita, and then God talks about himself in 7 to 11. Chapter 5 is also an important chapter that contains a few learnings, and the name of this chapter is Karma Sannyas Yoga, or Yoga of Renunciation from Action. It is also referred to as Sannyas Yoga. There are 29 verses in this chapter, and the chapter has a few important learnings. Today, we will cover verses 1 to 12. That is a total of 12 verses. Let's do the literal translation first, and then we will talk about some interesting things. Starting with verse 1, which is Arjun Uvach, Sanyasam Karmana Krishna Punaryogam Cha Shansasi Yat Shreya Etayoh Ekam Tat Me Bruhi Sunishchitam. Arjun says, O Krishna, you talk about karma sannyas, which is renunciation of action, and equally inspiring me to yoga, that is karma, or praising yoga, which is performing righteous action. Of the two, which one is superior? Please tell me for certain which of these two a better path is. You would remember that in chapter 4, God talked about inaction in action and action in inaction, and also praised actionlessness. It is different from idleness, which is considered to be bad, whereas actionlessness is good according to God. He also said karma is good, whereas vikarma is bad. And hence Arjuna is confused about whether actionlessness is better or performing action is better. Arjuna seeks clarity on these two, as God is praising both options. So this is the question that Arjuna raises in verse 1. Verse 2 is Shri Bhagwan Uvach, Sanyasa Karma Yogascha Nishreyaskar Ubhav Tayoh tu Karma Sanyasat Karma Yogo Vishishyate. God says that both the paths, that is renunciation of action and performance of action, are praiseworthy. But out of the two, Karma Yoga is superior to Karma Sannyas. Yoga of action is better than Yoga of renunciation. This is an important verse. Karma Yoga is superior to Karma Sannyas. So, in some ways, God says that doing action is better than renunciation of action. This is verse 2. And then verse 3 is Geya sa nitya sannyasi yo na dveshti na kanshati nirdvando hi mahabaho sukham bandhat pramuchyate. God says, O mighty armed one, which is a name for Arjuna, the karma yogis who neither desire nor hate anything should be considered as true renunciates. One who is free from the dualities of good and bad, love and hate, success and failure, is easily liberated from the bondage of karma. This is verse 3. Then I will read verses 4 and 5 together. Sankhya yoga prithak bala pravadanti na pandita ekam api asthita samyak ubhayo vindate phalam yat sankhya prapate sthanam tat yogah api gamyate ekam sankhyam cha yogam cha yah pashyati sa pashyati. God says that children consider Sankhya, which is self-realization or knowledge, and Yoga as different, whereas a wise person does not. Those who are truly learned realize that by applying ourselves to any one of these paths, we can achieve the results of both. The state of Sankhya can be attained by Yoga. Hence, those who see Karma Sannyas and Karma Yoga to be identical truly see things as they are. Verses 4 and 5 are very important, and we will come back and talk about these verses. Now let me read verses 6 and 7 together. Sanyasah tu mahabaho dukkham aptum yogata yog yukto munir brahma na chirena adhigacchati yog yukto vishuddhatma vijit atma jitendriya sarva bhutatma kurvannapi na lipyate. God says, O mighty armed, which is a name for Arjuna, it is difficult to attain perfect renunciation without yoga, but the wise who is adept in karma yoga quickly attains Brahma or eternal peace. The karma yogis who are of purified intellect have won over their self, have controlled their minds and senses, and see self in every living being, who doesn't get affected while performing all kinds of actions. So these are verses 6 and 7. And now let me read verses 8 and 9 together. Naiv kinchit karomi iti yukto manet tatvit pashyan shrinvan sprishan jigran ashnan gachan swapan shwasan pralapan visrijan grinan unmishan nimishan api indriyani indriyartheshu vartant iti dharyan. God says, the wise always believe that I am not the doer, even while engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, speaking, giving, grasping, and opening or closing the eyes. He knows that it is only the material senses that are interacting with material objects and the outcomes of these interactions. These were verses 8 and 9, and it's important to know that the wise don't consider themselves as the doer. We've talked about this earlier as well. Verse 10 is Brahmani adhaya karmani Sangam tyaktva karoti yah lepete na sa papen padma patram iv ambasa. God says, those who dedicate their actions to God, abandoning all attachment, remain untouched by sin, just as a lotus leaf is unaffected by water. Verse 11 is Kayena manasa buddhaya kevalah indriya api yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaye. God says yogis, while giving up attachment, perform actions with their body, mind, intellect and senses only for self-purification. This is verse 11. Verse 12 is Yukta karm phalam tyaktva shantim apnoti nashtikim ayukta kamakarin phale sakto nibaddhite. God says that one who is attached to yoga attains everlasting peace by abandoning the fruits of actions, whereas the one who is impelled by desires or attached to the fruits of action is entangled. So this is verse 12, and again some important things are being talked about in this chapter. Some of these are repetitions, whereas some are new. I will cover some of the important verses. To begin with, let's talk about verse 5.2, where God says Sanyasa karma yogascha nishreyaskar ubhav tayotu karma sanyasat karma yogo vishishyate. Renunciation of action and performance of action are both praiseworthy. But out of the two, Karma Yoga is superior to Karma Sannyas. Yoga of action is better than Yoga of renunciation. So God is saying that you must fight your righteous battle, as the Yoga of action is better than Yoga of renunciation. A devotee who has renounced the world and is merely meditating in a cave has chosen the inferior path. Paramahansa Yogananda says the path of a householder yogi is more difficult, and I do not disagree with that. Householder yogi's path is more difficult as compared to the one living in solitary confinement, that is in a cave. And Yogananda explains this with an example. Suppose two people are meditating or focusing on work, and one of them has a telephone in his room, whereas the other doesn't. The telephone rings, and one of them says, the bell of the telephone doesn't affect me, as I will be engaged and engrossed in my work and will keep on meditating. The other person dislodged the telephone wire and resumed work. In this case, the path of the first person is difficult, and hence Paramahansa Yogananda uses this analogy and says the path of the householder yogi is difficult due to so many obstacles that distract him or her from their duties. Maybe it is true that the path to yoga of action is difficult. Even then, God clearly states that yoga of action is better than yoga of renunciation. He also says the path of the householder yogi is better than the one meditating in a cave. So 5.2 is an important verse, and we will talk about this verse later on as well as we go through further parts of the Gita. Next, let's talk about verse 5.3, where God says, Geyam sa nitya sannyasi yo na dveshti na kankshati nirdvando hi mahabaho sukham bandhat pramuchate. In this verse, God describes a renunciate as someone who is not stuck in dualities, who neither desires nor hates anything, and hence such a person is easily freed from all the bondage. So a renunciate is one who has renounced their senses, ego, attachment to the fruits of actions and the concept of doer. This is the definition of the renunciate. He is not the one who has run away from everything and has set up his base in a jungle. This is the definition of a renunciate as far as Gita is concerned and as far as I can understand. This is verse 3. I am emphasizing important learnings from chapter 5. That is, the path of the householder yogi may be difficult, but it is a superior path. Next, verses 4 and 5 are important verses and have been quoted in many forums. Let's talk about these verses. Sankhya Yogao Prithag Balah Pravadanti Na Pandita Ekam Api Asthita Samyak Upayo Vindate Phalam Yat Sankhya Prapate Sthanam Tat Yogah Api Gamyate Ekam Sankhyam Cha Yogam Cha Yah Pashyati Sa Pashyati. Children consider Sankhya or self-realization and yoga different, whereas a wise person does not. Those who are truly learned say that by applying ourselves to any one of these paths, we can achieve the results of both. The path to Sankhya is the same as yoga. Hence, those who see karma sannyas and karma yoga to be identical truly see things as they are. God says that Sankhya and yoga are the same. The common definition here is that Sankhya refers to Jnana Yoga, whereas Yoga refers to Karma Yoga. God mentions Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga, and God had mentioned these two paths at the beginning of chapter 3. In verses 4 and 5 of chapter 5, God says that Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga are the same, and the one who lives in one attains the other. Children say that these are different. However, they are the same. At the end of chapter 4, we said that God considers Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga as the same, and they are not different, which has now been corroborated in these verses. A slightly different explanation is that Sankhya means self-realization, and Yoga reflects perseverance principles and rational discrimination. Sankhya reflects self-realization, that is, who is the self, and what its relationship with the eternal is. Both are unborn and undecaying, and are in every living being. And Yoga and Sankhya are the same, meaning that there is no difference between them. In chapter 2, God talks about both Sankhya and Yoga, but both are the same. So this is another explanation which is fine. I am not disputing which interpretation is correct. I think both interpretations are fair. If you say that the realization of the self is the same as Yoga, then it's correct. And if you say that Jnana and Karma Yoga is the same, then that is also correct. Both are fine. Those were verses 4 and 5. And then verse 6 is important, where God says, Sanyasa tu mahabaho dukkham aptum ayogata yoga yukto munir brahma na chirena adhigachati. God says it is difficult to attain perfect renunciation without performing work in devotion. Renunciates renounce their senses, ego, and attachment to the fruits and the concept of a doer. But it is very difficult to do so without yoga, without putting in proper efforts or perseverance in work. You might remember that in chapter 4, God talks about yajna or renunciation and says that yajna is linked to karma. So here also God says that it is not possible to attain renunciation without karma or yoga. That is verse 6. Next, I would like to cover verse 10. Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tyaktva karotiya lipete na sa papen padma patram iv ambasa. So one who has established themselves in Brahma and does all action by abandoning all attachment remains untouched by sin, just as a lotus leaf is unaffected by water. This is a fine analogy. But what is Brahmani Adhaya? Focusing on me doesn't mean that you start worshipping God on the battlefield. Who am I? In chapter 2 and episode 17, when we discussed verse 2.61, there was a similar reference to focusing on me as well. Mai. Here we are discussing Brahmani Adhaya. So who am I? Who is this Brahma? Who is this me? We will talk about this in detail once we read chapters 7 to 11. Brahmani is all the forms of God, including the physical form, the unmanifested form. Brahma is eternal bliss, eternal peace, skill in action, knowledge and meditation, and hence it can have multiple definitions. God says, I am the best of the best of the best. I am Arjuna of Pandavas. I am the radiance of the sun, and I am the fragrance of earth. So Brahma could be anything that you would want it to be. And that's what is the objective of the righteous battle. So Adhai in Brahma means to focus on what you want to understand, and I interpret it as the objective in the righteous battle. So this is 5.10, and again we have talked about it in the past and I'm repeating it. Finally, it is important to touch upon verse 11, wherein God says, Kayena mansa buddhaya kevalah indriya api yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaye. So yogi while giving up attachment, performs actions with their body, mind, intellect, and senses only for self-purification. What is self-purification? It is the purity of the soul, or the victory of the soul over ego, or Krishna's victory over Bhishma. A yogi performs his duties for this. The victory of the soul over the ego is the essence of verse 11. We will stop here. And again, you can see chapter 5 is now refining the concepts of chapters 1 to 4, reiterating those concepts and clarifying. We will stop here today. Thank you.